Hi, once again, I'm Sydney. I am a servant of the Almighty God. I'm the author of multiple books, and there'll be a new one coming out, which is going to have a lot of really good information. But before I get into this episode in the series on recognizing God's omnipotence, I must always remember to remind us all that we are always in the presence of the living God. So everything we do, we are in His presence. So in this episode, which will be titled "There is no natural selection, there is only intelligent adaptation." When this inspiration came to me, and this is something that comes to me and wakes me up at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and I jump on the computer and I have to write it down. I'm like, what the, because this is kind of mind-blowing for me. But it's, again, I have to give you a little bit, remind you of my background, right? I am a software engineer. I've done work for lots of, private companies. I've done work for the state and federal government. So, if you want to look up some of the things I've done with AI, you can look at the 2021 MongoDB Innovation Award winners, where, we had, as a big database administrator, I was on this project where every day, we had Scrum meetings, and they would be like, "Sydney, can you look at why this thing is running slow?" And there was a whole series of things I would have to do to figure out, what and when and all this stuff. And, even recommendations, how to speed it up. So I built some AI to the point where I would get it in the morning, it would prepare a report for me. These are the things that people are trying to do, and this is why they're running slow. And here's how you can optimize it. So instead of waiting for the meeting, the Scrum meeting, where they would be like, "Sydney, can you go look at this?" I would be calling the guys early in the morning. "Hey, I see that this stuff you're building is going to run real slow, or it's going to be problematic. What are you trying to do?" And I already had the recommendations because the AI had recommended things, right? But I built all that stuff. So I'm a guy who's about logic. Bits and bytes. My whole life my professional life has been computers, building software from on every platform, all kinds of software, mainframe, mid-range, so my life, it's bits and bytes, yes and no, on and off. So when these things come to me, I'm like, what? But this one is big. But I will try to take you along on the journey so that you fully understand it. So there is nothing, because I've never been good with religion because of the dogma, and you have to just believe. I understand. I believe there's a creator. I am a servant of the Almighty God. But the dogma and just follow me, trust me and follow me, I have a problem with that, right? So let me talk about this, where it came from I don't know, but how it makes sense that there is no natural selection, there is only intelligent adaptation. So before that, I have to digress a little bit. There is something that, and this is all coming up in my next book, where I'll go into a lot of more details and delve into all the bits and bytes and all that stuff. But here's a synopsis I'm trying to give you so that you understand where this is coming from and what it all means. Okay? So I'm trying to connect the dots here. There is something that, again, came to me. It's called, I call it, and it's in the book, it's called the GPS phenomenon. So what is this GPS phenomenon? Well, the concept is this. Many years ago, we, assigned these longitude and latitude to the globe, the Earth that we live on. And so based on that, those longitude and latitude, we can find any point on the globe. So we put up a bunch of satellites, and using that basic concept, right, the satellites are up, we have GPS established, because through the satellites we can say, okay, where am I today? And it will tell you, okay, you are this longitude, latitude, this is your location. If you're driving, you can, so that's how GPS basically works. So we created this system, GPS, and now everything we build can use that. It can have an awareness of GPS. So in not just your phones or your cars, everything, your refrigerator, your stereo, everything can have an awareness of this GPS. So it can say, I am here today. And if you're moving it, it can say, I am moving. That's awareness. That's what that's the analogy I want to use when I talk about the GPS phenomenon. So a creator created something, and everything after that could have something in it that becomes aware of what was created before. Get it? So anything that we create now could have GPS awareness. Right? So getting back to the main core of this, there is no natural selection, only intelligent adaptation. So if you followed this series, you know that I talk about the ISIS, Life's Logic Module. So what has happened is that the creator has created this ISIS, this Life's Logic Module, and that's contained within everything. So you look at a plant, you look at any animal, they at the very cellular level, because this is what controls, this is what dictates. People, they say, well, you have an egg and the egg starts dividing. Well, logically, there has to be something that says, don't just keep splitting and becoming 4 and 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and 128 and keep going on and on, just dividing. At some point, the egg has to start saying, okay, I'm going to start creating these organs. I'm going to create blood vessels. And I'm talking about a more complex organism that's being the result of this egg. Okay? So something has to direct that process. And they will tell you, well, it's chemical. Well, something has to manufacture that chemical. Something has to have a sensor to detect that chemical. You see? So that whole sensory system, and that's why I talk about the ISIS, it knows. It knows about the DNA. That's the configuration. The ISIS says, oh, by your DNA configuration, I know who you are. I know what your physical capabilities are. It also has an awareness of the senses, what sensors are available. So if you are maybe a worm or a tree, the ISIS, it's the same. It says, I know your configuration, I know what sensors you have, I can react to that. So it's that intelligence, the intelligence at the very base of life. So let me get into what natural selection is supposed to be. Natural selection depends on random. So that whole theory of something randomly came out of the primordial soup, and it's constantly randomly mutating. Okay? And so every life form should be randomly mutating all the time. Mother Nature and this natural selection, so Mother Nature is the place where the things that survive, because natural selection is like a sieve or a filter. So all these things are randomly mutating all the time. And only the successful ones, out of all these random things, only the successful ones, they form what we call nature. So it's like after it goes through this natural selection process, because these could not survive because they were invalid. Right? This random mutation was invalid, so he just fall aside. Here is the problem. There should be, in the archaeological record, we should have lots and lots and lots of these things. Because if you think about it, the random is happening all the time. It didn't stop, in some era in the past. So we should see that. And it should be continuing today. So every mosquito, every mouse, every fly, even us human beings, which we should be randomly mutating all the time. And so we should have evidence in the past, and currently we should be having evidence of this random mutation that natural selection needs to filter out. We should see people falling off because they were inappropriately, randomly mutated. In every life form, we should see that. Do we see that? Absolutely not. And it's nowhere in the archaeological record. What we see instead, and you can check this out, because I did. In my research, this has to make sense to me. And so I go into the AIs, they are all available, and you question, show me examples of random evolution in the archaeological record. And here's the stuff that they come up with. This is amazing. And again, like I said, my background and my life is IT and logic, binary ones and zeros. I'm not doing quantum, okay? I'm doing yes or no. Here is the logic that the AI, because this is what has been put into it by all our knowledge from all these naturalists. What they've come up with is, I'll give you a few examples. They are what they call I think it's a Janao. These people who live on the shores of Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, they live on the coast. These people, it's amazing. They spend, up to 8 hours a day in the ocean. In the ocean. So their livelihood depends on them living in the ocean. Their bodies have adapted. This is examples that you will find that that we use as random evolution. Listen to this. Their bodies have adapted, so they have a larger spleen. And that the spleen, apparently, I didn't know this, but doing the research I found out, the spleen apparently it becomes a reservoir for additional oxygen. These people can dive, wait for this, they can dive up to 200 feet, up to 60 meters approximately, and stay underwater for over 10 minutes. You and I, in 2 minutes, we drowned. They can stay underwater for over 10 minutes. They've been doing this for hundreds of years, for centuries. They've been living, working in the sea, diving for shellfish or whatever else they go get their sustenance and their means of living. And so their bodies have adapted. It has enlarged their spleens so that they can stay underwater for over 10 minutes. Amazing! But is that a random evolution? Is that a random mutation? Think about it. You need something. Now, if to me, as a software engineer, someone who is about logic, random means you needed some mechanism, something in your body, some adaptation to give you the ability to stay underwater longer and dive deeper. If it had given them a tail or horns or hairy skin, I would say that's random. But it gave you what you needed. That is not random. That is intelligent adaptation. That's the ESIS, that life force looking at this is a challenge that I need to meet, even though it's meeting it without any conscious effort on the part of the people benefiting from it. See? So the ESIS is that life force. It's like that subconscious. It's that soul, if you will, within us that works in our benefit. And not just for us, a tree, anything, because that's a life force. That's life's logic module. It has that GPS phenomenon. It knows what's around you. It knows what the challenges are. Because they created the ESIS and embedded it in each of us. But it also embedded that GPS phenomenon. There are these factors, these forces of nature that you have to deal with. In their case, they needed to dive because they are in the water constantly, they are diving. How can I adapt their bodies to assist them? This is not random. Let's take another example. Again, you could go in the AI and get it. There's this thing about, people started in Africa and they migrated away. As they migrated northward, there was less sunshine. And so there's a deficit of vitamin D. This is an example that's given as an example of random mutation. As they migrated away to areas where there was less sunshine, their skin color became lighter. That enabled them to create more of this necessary vitamin D. Now, how in the world could you call that random? That is intelligent adaptation. And so we can't see people going more green, more yellow, and falling off based on natural selection. No, this is intelligent adaptation. So the examples that they give is actually of the intelligent adaptation. There is no example of random. There's even example of sickle cell, right? Sickle cell, the Africans, I guess, who were dealing with malaria, and I didn't know this, but when you look at it, like, yeah, sickle cell became as a result. So this is something, you have maybe an existential threat, something that's putting generations under pressure. And so the body decides, how can this is the easis, because this is unconscious of the body. We are not consciously doing that. Just like a tree is not consciously, or when the weather starts changing, the tree doesn't consciously decide, well, I'm going to drop my leaves because I'm going to start hibernating. When I talk about, if you look at some of my other, the other episodes where I talk about the ham dilemma, right? Where we see animals going through hyperphagia. Before they go into hibernation, they have to eat, and eat a lot to gain weight so that they survive. These are things that I gave as examples of that could not develop over time. Because the first bear had to have the programming, right? The easis had to be set right to know that you have to go through this hyperphagia and eat to get fat so that you can last for the duration of the winter. And so they would say, oh no, winter was apparently winter was a day, then it became a week. But how does one bear tell its forebears, or it tells all the people that follow it, like its grandkids, get prepared? It does not. It's the easis within us that intelligently it's aware. But that's what I call the GPS phenomenon. It knows that there is a winter that's going to be this long. How can the easis, adapt? What modifications can I make both to the DNA, so the physical configuration of the organism, whether it's a plant or animal, can last for that period? Because the easis knows the creator created. And you see, this is one of the issues I guess I've always had with religions. Religions seem to condense the creator into a man. We equate the creator of everything we know, the forces of nature. We want to condense that into a man. And so we equate, well, we can do this, then the God that we create can only do this. But when you look at the fullness of everything, the universe. Now, that's the one thing with everything that I'm doing. There is that one unanswered question. Where did this intelligence, where did God come from? I have no idea. Okay? But unlike, the naturalists and scientists who just say, well, this random, and then it's like, show me the evidence. There is no evidence. What we see is evidence of intelligence within everything. You look at a cockroach, you look at a worm, you see the intelligence. They don't just randomly run around. No. They said, look, a cockroach says, I'm going to sneak out when it's dark. I'm going to have the facilities, whether it's for the senses, right? Whether I can see or smell or hear or whatever, because this is what prolongs my life. So we see that common thing. The East is saying, no, when I'm in this form, part of my role is to prolong life, to procreate and create more. So the East is doing whatever it is, whether it's in a plant that says, I'm gonna create some pretty fruit to attract birds or attract the specific animal, as in the case of, we see plants and flowers that require a very specific hummingbird, because the form of the plant, a regular hummingbird cannot get the nectar. As we are learning, there are flowers that contain a charge that is opposite to the bee. So the bee gets attracted based on electrostatic charges. This is intelligence. This is the Isis at work. This is this life's logic module, which now have been inspired, and I'm bringing it out there, has this GPS phenomenon. It is aware. This is why when they talk about, this, again, symbiotic relationships, when they talk about, this, the race to get, more poisonous, all this, the arms race, right, between plants and animals and between different species. How does that, random cannot explain that. Random cannot relate to an arms race. But intelligence can, because this plant recognizes, as is the case, if you ever check out, and again I reference all these things in my next book. This book, it's taken a while, but it references all of these things. If you look at there's an online, it's called In the Mind of Plants, right? If you look at this documentary online, this is one of the early ones that recognized that these plants were being overgrazed by these animals. And guess what they did? They found out that the plants were starting to poison those damn animals. They were like, hell no, you are not going to eat me down till I die. So the plants, these acacia plants, started poisoning the animals that were feeding on them. And the animals started dying, and then they brought the universities in, and they started realizing, whoa, when you overgraze, they create all these tannins that poison the animals. And not only did they poison the animals, they also emitted this gas. I think it was methylene, this light gas that would drift on the wind. And when this gas drifted, the other plants recognized. And that sounds pretty simple. Think about this. You have to have sensors. Something had to design the organs within the plant that was producing the poisons, producing the gas. And it also had to produce and design sensors on the other plants so they can detect it. Think about how complex that is. Does random apply there? You see, and this is the things where I said these naturalists and scientists, oh no, Mother Nature. But no, Mother Nature is just, and they will, when you really dive into it, if they don't just become very dogmatic and say, well, Mother Nature, Mother Nature, Mother Nature, Mother Nature, they will accept that Mother Nature is the place where natural selection occurs. So there is no logic. There is no logic. But the examples I gave you with these people with the enlarged spleens, people becoming lighter, that is logical. But they give that as examples, or getting the sickle cell to prevent the deleterious effects of malaria. That's all logical. It's directed. This is the product of intelligent adaptation. And it's not based only on, because again, that whole scenario depends on random. None of this is random. It's directed. It's purposeful. It's what I call design for a purpose is a demonstration of intelligence. When you see something designed for this specific purpose, that is not random. When somebody gets lighter skin to produce more vitamin D because there was some deficiency there, that is not random. Random would, like I said, it would be if they grew horns, or they got hairy, or they got a tail, or something totally unrelated. But when we see very specific, as in the case of these people who, these sea nomads, who their spleen enlarged. And the spleen, it now holds more oxygen so that they can stay over 10 minutes underwater and dive, up to 200 feet. This is very specific. These are examples of intelligent adaptation. There is no random. The other thing about this random stuff, because again, random is required by natural selection. You have all these random things, and then natural selection selects. It's kind of like a process that all these things are unfit, so they die out. That process did not stop. In theory, it would never have stopped. So it's ongoing right now. We should be detecting these random mutated plants and animals everywhere. We're not. What we're seeing are examples of intelligent adaptation everywhere. And this explains that it's something within every organism. So whether it's a plant, it's an animal, in any shape or regardless of how it works, that esis within them is basically there for their benefit. So it says, you need this, let me see how I can assist you in getting that targeted, directed mutation. And so this is what, again, I think Charles Darwin saw this. But it's just like, a lot of this may go back to the fact that, again, like I said, I have issues with religions. Because religions, you think about the Inquisition, and religions can be very, very harsh, very, very one-sided, very, very, very coercive. They force you, you must do this. And no, it's about free will. It's about free will and education. Now you know that we all exist in the presence of that Creator. The one who created that basic intelligence that's within every one of us. This is the amazing thing. And we don't limit it to a man who couldn't be in the ocean or couldn't be in, totally airborne. The Creator, that's the omnipotence. And so we can recognize the omnipresence of the Creator. Every word I speak. And even though, like I said, I am based on logic, but you see this all ties together. And this is more logical than all the, you have to just, I'm like, no, there's one piece missing, right, in this. Who is the Creator? But we see evidence of it. We see evidence. When you see a drone, when you see an autonomous car, and I'll talk about these, when we get level 5 autonomous driving, and all these people will be laid off, and whatever happens to the economy with all of that. But when we see autonomy, full autonomy, we recognize the intelligence that's within, that guides, that is the driving force behind all of this. And this is what we see everywhere in nature. The trees, the birds, the bees, everything. We see the intelligence. When you look at a bird building a nest, we see intelligence. That is not something that came out of random. Because then every bird, would be doing its own thing. You see this bird doing this, and the same species would say, no, I'm random, I'm just... No, within that species, he does a very specific thing. Again, I spend a lot of time looking at these things, and when you look at something like, what is it, the honey guide? Oh, it's beautiful, but it's horrible. It lays its egg inside of another bird's nest, and its young, they said it incubates its own young within itself. So its egg hatches first. and it grows this special hawk kind of bill and kills all the other all the other stuff. We may think that this is terrible, but this is what he's put out there as nature. We can see this is a sustainable system because we have the ratios between prey and predators. All of these things are well designed. We don't design things. We just build stuff and then dump it in a dump, right? And it fills up, and then we figure out, well, what do we do with all this plastic? But he's designed a system, and so rather than be trying to judge the creator, no. Recognize his system. Recognize the beauty of his design because it's all recyclable. Who is to say? Even things like, and I'll touch on some of that in my book, right? Things we've heard about, reincarnation and all this other stuff. Who knows? Understand that with the Creator, all things are possible. But my focus is the revelations that come to me, the inspiration that now is showing, and hopefully you've gotten this picture. There is no natural selection. We would see this everywhere, even now. We would see butterflies and birds and mice and worms and every form of animal. We would see them mutating randomly and dying off, because if you think about random, it would go in every direction, but there's only one that survives, right? Because that, or maybe a few, but there'd be even more than survive. There would be so many mutations that are falling off because of natural selection. They're not properly, outfitted for progressing into the future. We don't see that. Nowhere in the archaeological record do we see that. Matter of fact, the examples I gave you of, these people the sea nomads, and their spleens expanding, that is not random. That is targeted. That is intelligent adaptation directed by the force within them, the life force, the Isis, life's logic module. That's what we are seeing. So we don't know where the logic started, but we can see that it's been implanted. When I talk about the ham dilemma, hibernation, estivation, metamorphosis, we can see it within. So that butterfly, it knows, again, the GPS phenomenon. It knows that there was a plant. It knows that there was a plant that I must lay my eggs on it, because that's what my seed, the caterpillar, will eat. The caterpillar going into the chrysalis and then turning back into the butterfly. Even the migration, when we look at butterflies that migrate from Mexico to America and Canada and back, that's inbred. That's within the Isis. Again, with the GPS phenomenon, it knows what is north and south. When we look at the salmon, when we look at all these things, we see intelligence. So the random, which again, natural selection requires random, right? You have all this stuff, and then natural selection kind of filters out all the bad stuff. Well, we don't see the bad stuff. What we see is progressively things are moving in a certain direction. We see intelligent adaptation. So I hope that I didn't just ramble, but that you got the picture. Because this is something, like I said, this will be in my next book. It's taken a while because there's so much, it encompasses so much information. So, but I wanted to get this out here because it's been a while that I haven't put something out. And so you think that, oh, what happened to this dude? Well, I am a servant of the Almighty God. There are constant revelations coming to me, and it's my work, my purpose, why I was born, to put this out here. Because I started off in a little village, and getting into this IT stuff, and then bringing back this other stuff, and merging them. But I recognize that. That is my job, and I'm trying to do my job. So I'm putting it out there. And so I hope, that when the book comes out, you will take the time to go into more details that I'm spending time getting ready for you, to show that there is no natural selection. There is only intelligent adaptation based on the work of the Isis that is embedded in all life forms. So once again, I want to thank you for taking the time for listening to this, and hopefully you'll do your own research, and we can all be part of that change that brings the world to recognize our Creator, the omnipotent, omnipresent God. So thank you once again for taking the time, and until next time, may God continue to bless us all. Thank you.